Welcome to the Thrive podcast with the Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church.
How does your faith kind of play into it, or does it play into it?
What can be done about it? When I say the church, I'm talking about evangelical white Christians and the black folk who attend their churches.
Hello, welcome to the Thrive podcast with the Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church. I'm Fred Jeff Smith, pastor of Shiloh, and I'm very happy that you chose to either view this on YouTube or listen to us on iTunes, Amazon Prime, or Spotify. I forgot Spotify. Please let us know how we're doing. We always invite feedback. You can reach me at fredjeffsmith@cox.net, fredjeffsmith@cox.net. Drop us a line and let us know how we are doing. I am very honored and pleased to have with us today as our guest the Vice President of the East Baton Rouge Parish School Board, Don Collins. Mrs. Collins, thank you so much for coming to share with us today.
Thank you.
So let's jump right into it.
All right.
I could start with, tell me your background, tell me your story. I want to talk about the fact that today's paper says that the overwhelmed East Baton Rouge Parish School adds teachers because of the virtual school academy, that there's been a lack of teachers and vacancies you've had difficulty filling the vacancies. Can you shed any light on what's going on with that?
Okay. Well, and my grandson is in the virtual school. He's 5, just made 5, September 26th,
yes,
in
ma'am.
Kindergarten. And we felt at the time that was the safest due to pandemic, yada, yada, yada. And so he's not personally experiencing any confusion because the elementary schools are fully staffed with EBR teachers. The middle schools, however, is where the middle and high grades is where we're having problems. We've had a long relationship. Well, this is not our first experience with the vendor, Proximity. 2017, 2018, H.R.I.V.E. came to us with, there are some hard to fill subject areas. Like it's hard to fill chemistry, your sciences, your technical seats. And so Proximity offered, hey, while you're working on a in-person live body, we can have a certified teacher with all the credentials virtual. So that's how we got started with our relationship with Proximity. Now with this idea of having
Proximity provides teachers for the school system?
Yes,
okay.
Virtual teachers. It's always been virtual.
Okay.
But the relationship started prior to the pandemic, and it was to fill teacher vacancies that in subject areas that you tend to have a difficult time.
I just want to make sure that everybody understands.
Yeah, and I wanted to make sure I give that background before I then go into fully answering your question.
All right.
So we have had a relationship with Proximity prior to the pandemic, and it worked out fine because it wasn't like trove of teachers that we needed. The dynamics at play now, and I shared some of these thoughts last night during the board meeting, is that we had an initial response to the pandemic, like all schools across the nation. It worked relatively well. Of course, something brand new is going to have some hiccups, but it worked relatively well. What we did last school year when we came back was we ended up with in-person. We had 3 options. We had totally in person. The child could be 100% in person. We had situations where, and in the in person situation, you had like the students were in person a certain number of days, and then another cohort of students in that same classroom came the other days, so that you can deal with your classroom size and accommodate social distancing needs. All right. And then we also had students who were totally online. We had the ability to, if a teacher needed to quarantine or if there was exposure in the classroom at a time where children were eventually shown to not be spreaders and I don't know what you call it, and catchers.
Receivers.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
You know, where the concern of the COVID spread was not as bad for children last school year, we had the ability that if there was a known case in the classroom, shut that class down for the time. It physically shut the class down for the time needed, get it clean, and then the teacher and the children who are not too sick to get online and they continue their lesson. Well, you know, so that's how we completed last school year, and it went relatively well. We didn't hear a lot of pushback, and it allowed and enabled people to, and some parents, the third option chose 100% virtual. It allowed families to choose what best fit them, and the enrollment was such that about a third of our student population was virtual. So we're talking about, if I remember the numbers correctly, like 12,000 families stayed home the whole year. Their schedules and everything could accommodate that. This year, this new superintendent decided he wanted to try something different, which, you know, that's happening all over the nation. Try something different from what you did the first time when you just had to respond. One concern that needed to be resolved was in situations where teacher had to teach hybrid because there were students in the classroom that chose to stay home 100%, and then you had your in-person students. Well, that's a lot. And I agree. I had that concern from the beginning. I was like, okay, I have to keep up with what these kids are doing. Then I have to make sure Lil John, Susie, Nathan are all paying attention on the screen. Do you need help on it? That's a lot. So this superintendent decided, well, let's expand the existing virtual school. So we have had the virtual school prior to, but it was limited in grades. It was middle to high, and so we needed to add elementary, or might be the opposite, I forget which, because the enrollment was always very low. That's why we didn't discuss their virtual school very often. When I say low, like I mean less than 100 students prior to the pandemic.
Yes.
And so conceptually, your initial thoughts about it is, well, okay, makes sense. You have a tool already at your disposal. Why not? The issue has become, and it's part of the reason why we didn't do it last year and erred on the side of the hybrid model until we figured out something else, was that we knew it would present a capacity issue. And as I explained last night during the school board meeting, we are at a place because our interest in virtual and 100% virtual from parents for concerns about the pandemic was a third of our student population. So when you go to a 100% virtual school site separate, and they stayed with their home school, everything was accommodated with their home school. All right. And the surveys over the summer said 300, maybe 600 students were interested. Well, but in a whole nother, for a whole nother school site. Like, you think about starting an in-person brick and mortar school, and you starting with 600 kids, and you think about how many classrooms you need, how many teachers. Well, quite naturally, and you're talking about in a matter of weeks, maybe a month, coming up with staffing a whole school. On top of that, the Delta variant hit. And so then those that were willing to leave their home school and choose the virtual school, the numbers exploded and doubled to, we're at 1,300, and they finally had to cap it because you already had a capacity issue from jump. And so that's where we find ourselves. Now, it's an obvious problem. Some classes have not had a teacher since the beginning of the year. Some wanted to minimize what the problem, how severe the problem is, by saying, because I made the point of, well, one of my colleagues asked the question, well, tell us how bad it is, from the superintendent and his team. And so, of course, quite naturally, people will skirt around that, and it's understandable. If it was me in the hot seat, maybe I would skirt around it too. But at the end of the day, we have an obligation as a school system to deliver a certain number of minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're talking about a class subject that has not had a teacher or a sub since school started, then we have to figure something out. And so it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
The answer to the question is it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
And if anybody's wondering, because it was mentioned during the board meeting as well, and it's a reasonable assumption, unless you look at a few things, the brick and mortar schools have some vacancies as well. But when EBR handles our vacancies, especially if we know it's going to be a hard to fill position like a chemistry or et cetera, then we work to put long-term subs in those in those classrooms. And if nothing else, we have a person, a substitute in there with a lesson plan, etc. So instruction is being met.
Right.
Might not be the instruction you would get with that permanent teacher, but there's instruction, effective instruction. And so the difference is, as I asked proximity last night, and they admitted to, is when these vacancies that you can't fill in the 6th through 12th grades, do you have a substitute pool? Do you have long-term subs? And the answer was no for the most part. Mm-hmm. Occasional subs, but he could not say with integrity on the mic that they have a long-term sub program.
Well, let me ask a different question.
Okay.
Along the same line.
Okay.
The teachers that they do provide,
Mm-hmm.
are they certified according to East Baton Rouge Parish School Board standards?
Now, I'll admit that F is the same circumstances as our previous relationship with proximity. The answer is yes, because I do remember asking that when we voted to approve that, okay? I'm assuming it's the same circumstances.
Okay.
I know for sure in the elementary schools, because it's our teachers, then the answer is yes.
Okay. So, if they are having difficulty in filling these teacher slots, then what's the alternative that the school board is considering, or have you all rendered a decision? I'm sorry, I wasn't at the board meeting last night.
It's only so much time in a day.
Yeah.
And I appreciate seeing you at the Faith Partnership Breakfast that morning that the district did for pastors in the district. So my answer is it has to be revisited. I'll be honest and say that on my end, I have been watching it play out. I've seen the emails from concerned parents documenting that my child still doesn't have yada yada. Seeing the reports provided based on those questions, the superintendent has not presented other options. And when I say I'll be honest, usually my response is, let me hurry up. Come on, let's meet, let's figure it out. But I'm that kind of personality, but I do have to catch myself because my legal purview is budget and policy, and I can communicate my thoughts, but I'm not in a position to say what I understand to be a better like, why don't you just let every school do their own virtual, right? And part of my hesitancy, and I will, and I'm just a very, very transparent and very candid. Part of my hesitancy is that recommending something and having faith that it's going to be implemented with fidelity. I don't know. And so then my hesitancy comes from, okay, recommend, hopefully they get it, and then they do it. But, and so then on a purely emotional level, it's very difficult situation to address.
Let's back up just a bit.
Okay.
All along the same lines.
Uh-huh.
Since COVID, since March of 2020. In your estimation, and I'm sure it's just a guesstimate, I'm not asking you for scientific numbers, how far behind have East Baton Rouge Parish students fallen in their educational pursuits and their educational achievements in the last 18 months?
Well, I would say just like all children across the nation, whether public or private, is a whole new animal that you have to figure out. And so then I'm sure many of them are behind. Even those that are more affluent are not where they would be otherwise. That being said, and I don't necessarily know how to quantify it, I would say significantly behind, because unless you have a parent who is present, that's able to, whether by time or by academic ability, be able to help that student navigate, then that child is experiencing some loss in a virtual setting. I'm in law school in the evenings. I graduate May 25th.
I saw that. Congratulations.
Thank you. And so I take all my classes online. I'm like, honey, it saved me the drive time. But it works for us. A Zoom online setting works very well, at least for me as an adult, because I can still interact. I'm still able to, hey. But then when you're talking about kids,
right,
it's a whole different ballgame. And matter of fact, my grandson, who is virtual right now, he has the family support system who, keep him on track and all this other, and et cetera. But even he is clear that, I'm tired of looking at this. And very vocal. Gigi, I'm tired of school right now,
Well, I read something or saw a chart that suggested that students are a minimum of 2 years behind.
Okay.
And I didn't know whether you agreed with that or if you thought it was worse than that. Because my question would be, how much confidence should I have in a high school graduate for 2022 being proficient in the basics? If I'm trying to hire him for a job, if I'm looking for a prospective worker at my business, how much confidence should I have in this person's diploma post-COVID?
I think you could have reasonable confidence, reasonably relative to the pre-COVID situation. In this sense, I mean, if a child, and I reshared an Instagram post that Senator Barrow had on her page about, the K through 12 experience pre-COVID, and so their ability to have a normal experience, like what the new normal is going to look like. It's not going to look like the old, but what we consider the old normal. And so the chart said, kindergarten never had a normal year. First grade, second grade, never had a normal year, and et cetera.
I think that's the chart that I'm referring to.
Oh, okay.
So,
okay.
yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you frame it like that, yes. Okay. So since we're talking about the same chart, and okay, so even in that though, my grandson is of some amount of exception. Children, like he's in kindergarten, but he had a normal year because he was in pre-K 3 and 4, and so he had a normal experience. In terms of your reference to your graduate that's graduating in 20, 21, 22, I think your confidence is relative to what you would have expected if the pandemic hadn't happened and these learning changes hadn't happened. A child who's at Baton Rouge High or what have you, or Liberty High or Scotlandville's engineering program, they going through COVID. I have to get my laptop. I have to, if they were already there, then they already there. Is there some loss? Yes, but it's not hard for them to catch up, or it's not hard for them to adjust. You can have confidence in their ability to come to a job. Those that were already struggling, it's even more of a struggle. In some cases, you know, you're dealing with higher truancy rates or things of that nature. And so I would say, generally speaking, it has exacerbated complications that were already present for those who are already struggling.
Is law enforcement sensitive to the struggles that the school system is having with keeping children in front of laptops and computer screens as opposed to being out on the streets? Is there a truancy problem in East Baton Rouge Parish? Post-COVID, that is greater than the truancy problem that existed pre-COVID?
My natural assumption is yes. The numbers, however, I think have to be looked at and studied because it's a matter of how is it now being documented. And that's the most I want to say on it because I've not, that particular piece of it, because I've been focusing on other pieces, I don't necessarily have the numbers to say with confidence it's absolutely such and such. But do you have some information?
I have thoughts, but all I have are thoughts.
Yeah,
it just makes sense to me. Knowing what I was like when I was in high school. If I'm left at home for 6 hours and I'm supposed to be on the laptop for 6 hours, it might end up being 2. And 4 hours.
And I hear
something else to do.
anecdotal stories of that, you know. But again, numbers wise, I haven't looked at it. But I wrote that down because I do need to dig into that. So.
Okay, let's turn the page a little bit.
All right.
How did the school board arrive at the conclusion that it was okay to pick someone to redraw the district lines who finished third in the qualifications that were asked for by the school board? The school board set up parameters and put out a request for proposal based on those parameters. And the person who finished first was not selected. The person who finished second was not selected, but the person who finished third was. What went into the thinking of your colleagues that would allow them to say it was okay for us to establish all of this criteria, but then pay no attention to the criteria that we established and pick this guy who apparently the majority of them wanted anyway?
I mean, the majority wanted. I mean, he got it, so.
Yeah.
It's not apparently that he got it.
Well, I was trying to couch it as best.
And I'm gonna try to couch my response because I have to work with folks to make sure, you know, don't mess me up because you mad at how I feel about the contract. But it was. I mean, it was. So give some more detail on what you just.
Well, for me, redistricting is a major thing.
It is
not just at the school board level, at every level.
Yes.
Judgeships, Metro Council, state legislature, state senate, all of that. To me, it's very important. It sets the table for the next 10 years and what politics in this state is going to look like over the next 10 years.
Yes.
So I get concerned. I know that this is an ongoing issue with those other entities. Nothing has been decided. But for the school board, it's already been decided. We're going to use this guy. And from what I understand, he's the same guy that they used 10 years ago.
And so,
well, if you messed it up 10 years ago, then what makes me confident in the fact, I'm using confidence a lot today, what makes me confident in the fact that you're going to get it right this time? By the way, you're white, and the others who scored better than you, scored higher than you, are black. So it's hard for me not to see a racial component. I'm not claiming racism, but a racial component that went into the choice that was made. That's my thought on it.
I mean, it's kind of, So yeah, I mean, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, race is a huge piece of the whole entire process. I mean, the nature of redistricting is racial in and of itself. And so when you have somebody, and I'm using numbers for illustration purposes. I don't remember the exact scoring, but to go back to some of your details, when you have embarked upon a contract review, an RFP process that you didn't have to take, you could have simply the rules allowed for one company to be recommended and presented to the board and voted on. We chose instead to implement an RFP process.
So they did not have to do an RFP process. Mm-mm. They chose to do an RFP process. Mm-hmm. And when the RFP process that they chose to do did not produce the results that they expected or wanted to have produced, they said, that's okay. We'll throw that out and we'll revert back to the fact that we have the right to do that. And was that the thinking that went into this?
I cannot speak for others, but I'll say the irony of it is that most of the committee, and don't make me pull out all the names, I just know when I looked at the committee makeup, I was like, well, most of the committee was white, and they scored the black firm the highest, and we're not talking about 2-3 point difference. We're talking about 20-something point difference out of about 6. I think the highest score was 640 something. Again, for illustrative purposes only. I don't quote me on the exact scoring numbers, but 640 or so. Then the next one down was 620 or 630 something, but the one that was chosen was like 620 something. So I mean, we're talking about, and the highest scoring one had 40 years experience, and it was. I have a cruel sense of humor, so I'm gonna say, it was kind of cute that one of the people who scored gave them less points on experience when they had more experience than all. And it kind of is like, and I said it during the board meeting, not on the day of the vote, but on the day that the process was reviewed. I said during the board meeting, and I said, and my colleague Evelyn Webb Jackson wanted to address the process as well. And she was pointing out a few things, and then after she did, I said, well, let's just call it like it is. And I said, and one of the points that I made was that, oddly enough, even though this company, in terms of if we were going to follow the RFP process that we didn't have to go through, they're black and they scored the highest, which goes to what do we tend to say as people of color? We have to, the black tax. We have to work harder and fight harder, and they did, because it showed in the points. And how cute it was that when you look at the number breakdown, even though they were cheated out of the experience by a couple of points by one of them, then they still had the highest.
Scored,
but they still didn't get the contract.
Yeah. Do you have any idea? It's not essential, but I'm just curious. Do you have any idea how much the contract was worth? How much this person is going to get paid to do this job?
I don't recall the numbers.
No.
To be honest, I don't recall the numbers because we vote on so many numbers.
That's all right. I'll find out.
All right. I mean, I'll get it for you. I'll get it. I mean, I'll go to the email and get it for you.
And I'll post.
All right.
I'm good at posting things.
All right.
Like that. So I have several questions about that. How is it that the school board got so far out in front of this when everybody else is still in the organizing stage of selecting someone? It sounds like to me, that people already had a plan in mind as to who they wanted and how they wanted it done, and they wanted to quietly be way out in front of everybody else, so that by the time the public is really turning their attention to this, the school board, the powers that be within the school board could say, well, we've already done that. You know, it's taken care of. That's my assessment of it.
Okay.
I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but
no, and I appreciate the words coming out of your mouth, because you have more experience than I do, in a sense of looking at how I've in my adulthood, in my political life, have experienced one prior redistricting, but my folk, you know, but you have experienced paying attention to several different redistrictings in comparison, and so then you do have a good deal of insight, and you know, but hearing what you're saying, I mean, it does sound likely. Again, Pastor, I'm not trying to say so much that when it comes to my lines, I just get all jacked up. Okay, but
that leads me to another question.
Okay.
Because I asked this of the superintendent. I had a meeting with the superintendent the other day. Me and colleagues of mine, Prophetic Voices, went to his office and we had a meeting. And one of the questions I asked was, what is the appeals process for school board redistricting as opposed to the state legislature? I know that the governor has the ability to veto redistricting lines if he finds them to be biased or unfair in any way, shape, or form. And I asked the superintendent, does the governor hold the same veto power over the school board redistricting? He did not know. And so I'm asking you, to whom do we turn once the lines are put out and the board says these are the lines that we want to accept? Is there an appeals process in place for those of us in the public who might look at the lines and say that they're skewed in the wrong direction?
So my basic understanding is yes. What are those details like? This is my first rodeo on this side of the table, being a decision maker, trying to finagle the process in my right to do so as one of the board members. Part of what I intend to do, and I just last night had asked at the in the September meeting. So last month, about a month ago, I had asked at the board meeting what's our timeline for our process going forward, so the public can know. And then I know, it's not on it wasn't on the agenda last night, and so I went ahead and emailed, and in my capacity as a board member, to say I want an agenda item. I say this is my official request for a timeline to be on the next meeting. So I've done that. My intention is to work with the Law Center and those who have experience, not only in the law, but specifically with redistricting, because I realize this being like a general understanding of redistricting is going to absolutely not be sufficient. And I need all of the support that I can get, in terms of how I'm going to personally engage the public, regardless of what whoever does. And to go back and answer part of your question, what is it about the EBR situation versus the other governmental bodies who have not yet chosen a contract, who have not, the spoken sentiment. So go ahead and get this done by the end of this year. The law.
While nobody's looking. Well, no, that's my editorial comment.
All right.
While nobody's looking.
Okay. And legally, though, you're aware that we don't have to do it until a month or 6 weeks or so before qualifying.
Yes. When everybody's going to be looking.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that, that's where we are in terms of what I plan to do with my constituents is have some meetings where I hear from some of them and say, hey, look, this, first wrap my head around what would make sense, talking with experts at Southern Law Center, and then being more public about what I'm doing, and so yes.
How is it that a school system that is overwhelmingly African American, 80% of your students or thereabouts are African American, overwhelmingly impoverished African Americans, is still managed by a majority white school board? Now that to me is somewhat of a rhetorical question because I know the answer to it. It's because of how the lines have been drawn. And that's why redistricting is so important this time around. It does not make sense that an African American school system is managed by a Caucasian majority board. And somebody's going to say, well, they live in the parish too. Yes, they do. But they have
never come to us.
They have opted out of the school system. And the only time they want to come back in is with a charter, which is a de facto private school at government expense. And so it's difficult for me to look at this and say that there's anything fair or equitable about the way that this is being done. And then there's certain names that are on the school board that have been on the school board for some period of time. And I don't know how it is that I mean, don't you guys have term limits?
Yes, we do.
How does Jill Dyson still remain on the school board?
So she was on the board at the time it was implemented, and the rule is they were grandfathered in. They were grandfathered in. So the term limit count didn't start until. So next term, so she and I, let's see.
But she can run again.
Yes, this last
with all the time.
Yes.
With all the time she has been on the school
EBR
board, she can run again. Connie Bernard's been on the school board for a long time. I just find it interesting that they have written the rules in such a way that they can maintain their positions
while
over a protracted
demographics are
period.
still changing.
Yes.
And they know that that's the trend, and it's always the trend for demographics to change in the way that they do. Yeah.
Well, there's another question that I want to ask, and it had to do with your previous superintendent, Warren Drake, who lied to me in my face when I asked about schools being built in prospective St. George. When he was running around the parish promoting the school tax measure, which I was in favor of because schools need to be funded. But my question to him was there a plan to build any facilities in what is under the prospect of becoming St. George? And he looked me in the eye and said, no buildings will be built in prospective St. George.
Okay.
Well, currently there's at least one building that I'm aware of that is scheduled to be built in prospective St. George. I got a problem with St. George. I have several problems with St. George. I don't need to review all of that just yet, although I might, just for the fun of it. But what is the thought process within the school board about building a building that in 5 years, more than likely, will no longer belong to the East Baton Rouge Parish School System?
So,
because St. George is going to happen, whether it happens today or 5 years from now. It's going once all the court proceedings are done, St. George is going to happen, and then they're going to come after all of these school buildings.
Yeah.
So, what goes into the thinking of your colleagues that's okay?
Okay, so regarding Superintendent Drake. And sometimes, yes, and he and I have a great relationship. He would make my head hurt sometimes. Help me, Jesus. Regarding to what he said, now, if he said there will be no building. He overspoke.
I think he couched it. He said, "At this time, there are no plans."
Okay.
They do the couch thing.
What I will say is, behind the scenes, he was absolutely resistant to using language, and the language doesn't guarantee that the building will absolutely be in the St. George area.
Mm-hmm.
I know Ms. Board Member Dyson was very vocal, and some others, about they wanted something that was going to explicitly be in that area.
Mm-hmm.
And he refused to go in that direction. Nor did she have the votes to get it amended for it to go in that direction, despite it being a 5-4 board, because it's obviously what it is. And some people might play games, but they don't like to be obvious about the games they play. And so, for example, the property that was more recently chosen to be in the southern region,
Mm-hmm.
which includes and does not include parts of St. George. We looked at property that was in, was out, and was adjacent. I voted, the property that ended up getting voted on off the Segan Interstate exit is in, but it's tangential, to my understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So then it's like,
Keyword was in.
absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely. We did that vote early last year, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so yes, I voted no, because it's like, no, can we get something that is not in?
Mm-hmm.
You know, why do we? I'm not, and I guess for some of them, the usual assumption is made. Okay, well, people on people who are more affluent pay more in taxes, so it might be in the St. George lines, but we pay for it anyway. I think, that's the sentiment that I perceive. Whether it's true or not, I think that's how they look at it. Okay.
People who are more affluent pay more
in taxes. Matter of fact, I used to hear that a
taxes.
lot from legislators when I used to do advocacy work at the state capitol before I got on the school board.
From a percentage basis, people who are more affluent pay far less in taxes.
Absolutely.
Based upon their overall income.
Absolutely.
I don't know what moron came up with the idea
Well, that's what
that you're paying more in taxes.
That's what they tell themselves. That's how they justify. That's how some justify why they do what they do.
Keep going. I just had to respond to that,
and you're
because
absolutely,
that's a bold-faced lie.
It is. And we and poor people or poorer people may not pay as much in property tax, but those regressive sales taxes.
Nobody pays property taxes. We don't ask corporations to pay property taxes. We ITEP everybody out of property taxes,
Mm-hmm.
and we have the most regressive sales tax system in the nation.
Mm-hmm.
In the United States of America, one of the poorest places in the country, has
Mm-hmm.
the most regressive sales tax program in the country.
Poor in terms of personal wealth, absolutely rich in terms of corporate wealth.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't pay taxes.
Nope. And then they get mad at you when they come to your board meeting saying they want another tax break because they have so many thousand staff, and you in the middle of facing. I'm referring to that ITEP that we voted down 2-3 years ago with Exxon. And they tell you about the employees that they have, and they get them on the mic and say, I need my job. Like the job would be in danger anyway. At the same time that you're telling them, I have 6,000 staff. Come at me with that. Do you care about their jobs?
Everybody's screaming and hollering, and I'm happy that Amazon has come to Baton Rouge. That's good. People are going to get jobs, so forth and so on. But Amazon don't pay no taxes.
True.
And in fact, there are news articles all over the place. There's a plethora of news articles that lament the fact that Amazon pays no taxes.
$0 in taxes,
So when we look at Amazon coming, that's not
a savior.
No,
Right.
not at all.
Now it's better than a empty Cortana,
Right.
and it's better than, you know. So they saying they coming with $15 an hour jobs, which unfortunately in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, is wow, you know.
Yes.
but I mean, this is nothing, you know, for them to pay 15 or more, because they, like you say, they're not investing with tax dollars.
And at the end of the day, pay taxes, don't pay taxes. If you're going to form an independent school district, taxes aren't going to be coming to the school system anyway.
Oh, it'll bankrupt.
It'll go to the independent school district of St. George.
Yes.
Now, I've lived long enough to have watched this happen with the Baker school system, with the Zachary school system, with the Central school system. I don't want to see it happen again with St. George, where we just give facilities to these. They don't. These cities didn't pay for those school facilities.
Correct.
They were given to them, and St. George is operating under the assumption that they are going to be given
because
Woodlawn
they are
High School, Woodlawn Middle, Woodlawn Elementary, Southeast Elementary, and this brand new school that they're about to build that in 5 years is going to be in the independent school district of St. George. I don't have a problem with them leaving. If they want to leave, by all means, leave. Just pay your fair share.
Pay what you owe
on your way out the door.
Yeah, because it's going to absolutely bankrupt the remaining school system, which is, oddly enough, one of the reasons why the Baton Rouge Chamber is against it. Like, every once in a while, you agree with your enemies.
Yeah.
But you know, I mean, yeah.
So when the school board has these sessions, and I imagine that you all have conversations that the public are not necessarily privy to, how is this justified?
Which part?
St. George.
Oh.
And building in that area, choosing this particular. I mean, there's a whole lot of land in East Baton Rouge Parish that you could have chosen.
Yeah, there was no justification given. I voted no, and I said, hey, I don't know.
And by the way, why do we keep building in flood zones?
I don't know.
You know, you have maps. We were talking about cartographers a little while ago. You have maps that show areas that are prevalent for flooding. Why do we keep building residences, schools, businesses in flood zones?
Because we have economic development white flight syndrome. Okay, and that's what we have left to go to, or that's what they have left to go to. Okay, they developed over here, and that's not good enough. Y'all can have it, and we gonna let it decline. So let's develop over here, and so now you have what you have left. Instead of the model being to build up and maintain what's built. The model profits more off of continuous white flight, and now you have it to the extent that folks even willing to run into flood zones. It doesn't make sense to me, but
that the parish ends up having to bail them out of. That my government dollars, my tax dollars have to bail you out of because you chose to build in a flood zone. Okay. When the superintendent was here, I had him here as my guest a couple of weeks back. I asked this question: is it fair to constantly compare an 83 school system, which the East Baton Rouge Parish school system is, with a 7 school system, which is what Zachary is, or a 4 school system, which is what Central is, if I'm not mistaken? Constantly, we see these headlines that say that the Zachary school system is one of the best in the state, and the East Baton Rouge Parish school system, by comparison, fails miserably with regard to test scores and what have you. Well, one has 7 schools, and one has 83 schools. That, to my way of thinking, is not a fair comparison. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are, I'll take it further. And there's some of the links I want to share with you once I finish viewing yours so we can discuss both of ours. So I have been doing a series of roundtables in July and August. I said, let me focus on specifically public ed, because I changed different topics, but specifically public ed. And I was talking with this brother, Keith Benson. He's a teachers union rep in Camden, New Jersey. Smaller school system, but they getting hit hard with privatization stuff as well. And so we talked about the whole narrative in the first place and how the narrative of failing schools began. Because I wanted a way in which to try to start educating community on the basic understanding of stop letting people tell you trash. The person that defines the terms is the one that's in power. They told you trash, and you said you letting these people tell you trash. So when you talk about the narrative of failing schools in public ed, it started in the 80s. I want to say the Monahan report. That's not a report. Nation at Risk. Right? I wanted to say the Monahan report because it had the equivalent impact. Right? So Nation at Risk, Ronald Reagan report of our schools are just terrible. They're in trouble. Yada yada. And the basis that they used were SAT scores. And they were saying that, and I'm going to generalize because I don't want to misspeak, okay, because I don't remember exact details, but they based this whole concept of failing schools on SAT scores and how the decade or so prior, there were higher passing rates of the SAT than they were at that moment. What they failed to tell you was around the same time, a whole lot more working class people had access to colleges and needed to take the SAT score. We already know when it comes to these standardized tests that it's the correlation between living standards and socioeconomic standards are reflected in your score, period. They don't say that. They just say, look how bad the numbers have gone from this period to that period. And they use that as the basis to push the standardization and the accountability, and that grew into the accountability movement, where we then, you get your No Child Left Behind, and they use this fluff language that, I have to remember this is a church podcast, but it makes me so angry. But they use this civil rights language. They use this language. They couch it and they dress it up. It's the wolf in sheep's clothing. They dress it up as, education is a new civil rights movement. Look at these poor children that aren't doing well, and every child can learn. And who in their right mind want to say, or who with compassion wants to say that every child cannot learn? I'm not going to say every child cannot learn, but the way that they choose to implement these things is they make these ridiculous goals, and they keep increasing the bar in such a way that, for example, in a state like Louisiana, who has constantly failed its children, instead of the practice of education rising while you're also raising the standards on the children and the staff teaching the children, we always fall short. It's always subpar in concept and implementation. So when Common Core came down, they just threw it out and said, teachers, teach these children. This, that, and the third. No professional development, no time to plan, no time to wrap their way around this quote-unquote new pedagogy. Meanwhile, there's also this privatization movement that's saying teachers don't need to be as credentialed as you say. They don't need retirement. They don't need. As a matter of fact, teachers don't need to be credentialed, and they're not all that good anyway. Like so you got the narrative of teachers aren't worth anything. So now people don't even recognize teachers as professionals. The professionals they are. Like, remember back when the teacher was the bomb.com in our community? Like, like of someone of high stature.
Right.
At the same time, you're also lessening the credentials of those over the teachers. For example, it's on the agenda that they didn't get a chance to finish voting because it was all out crazy at the last Bessie Board meeting. And they had to shut it down. But on the agenda was a vote to decrease the credentials of your local superintendent and the teachers as well. Well, how are you going to keep asking the students to perform higher and reach a higher level of attainment, but the people over them are less and less qualified? It doesn't work.
No.
And it's common sense. And so, but why do they want to do it? It fuels two things. Well, it fuels privatization in two ways. One, it helps to perpetuate the narrative of schools failing because you're putting people in the classroom, or you're trying to get people in the classroom that have a lower ability. Mm-hmm. And you have people over them who have very little clue. Another way, so by virtue of that alone, you're going to keep driving the narrative of failing schools. But then on top of that, people who are into privatizing love that concept because I can convince you so-and-so with 0 classroom experience or maybe 1 year classroom experience, but I put you through this leadership program and it's the business model because the public entities never know what to do.
Right.
Like they're always incompetent. Right? The business model is where it's at, right? And so I can convince you, someone who has very little practical experience in a classroom, to know what it takes to educate a child or to effectively manage a team to educate a child. I can convince you that you don't need this, that, and the third. I can convince you that this contract is going to come save the day or that contract is going to come save the day. And none of it is effective. And it all continues to perpetuate the myth of failing schools based on a faulty premise on purpose so that, okay, but we must need another contract because that one didn't work. Mm-hmm. We must need to close this school down because that didn't work, mm-hmm. instead of simply getting an effective leader with mm-hmm. adequate experience and strong management skills mm-hmm. versus closing a school. So then another way you can privatize is charter that building out and folks make money off of land and your tax dollars. Meanwhile, they actually have the audacity to it's the next civil rights movement. It's education is a civil, reading is a civil. I had an argument with a lady. She wanted to talk about the science of reading, and you could tell it was just propaganda. And I did some research because I said, "Some of you going too hard on this, sister. Mm-hmm. You going mm-hmm. too hard. It's mm-hmm. up to it." And a
lot of this they're hearing in churches. Where they go to worship has a lot to do with their thinking with regard to public versus private versus charter versus voucher education, which is why I got a problem with all these Negroes who go to white folks' churches. Because they're not just being taught, Jesus loves me, this I know. Yeah. They're being taught how to think mm-hmm. about things like public education and public services and their neighborhoods and things of that sort. Mm-hmm. And they come out with evangelical zeal. Yes. But they are 100% wrong on the facts of everything that they're saying.
Yes. Yes. Very true. And even amongst not black, black philanthropy, black caucuses. Remember when SLCC, mm-hmm. when Reginald Pitcher was over it, and he was like, we need to boycott. I forget what incident. It was before Alton Sterling. It was something else that happened there. Mm-hmm. He was like, we need to boycott. And bless his heart, he mentioned Walmart. Mm-hmm. Next thing you know, he was no longer... But that's because the National was getting money from Walton Foundation.
Absolutely.
And so then it's like, especially as people of color, it's very difficult unless you're in the middle of it and you know, but the average citizen, average community member, you know, they're going to work, they're making sure the kids do the homework or what have you, and it's hard to keep up with who is really being honest with the community. You know, I was, even me as a law student, there was this institute named after Thurgood Marshall. I won't give the exact institute name because just whatever, but it's named after Thurgood Marshall. So you think, oh, just, if I get a fellowship with these people, or, you know, a scholarship through this, you know, bam, because it's Thurgood Marshall. And they just put a name on some neoliberal foolishness. Mm-hmm. You know, the Black Compromise, and I've not been at the state capitol in a minute advocating, but at the time of the payday lenders. And Together Baton Rouge, Together Louisiana was organized, and then you look up and you like, what's going on with the Black Caucus? Well, Black folks, elected officials, it's hard for us to raise money in comparison, okay, to white folks. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, our friends, you know, those that you would tap into, like friends, family support systems who might donate, their funds are limited in comparison too. So by virtue of that, it's hard to raise money. And so then, quite naturally, if the payday lending folks say, hey, you know, then, oh, well, look, we can do this program and that program, or we can push this legislative initiative. But when it comes time to deal with payday lending, you just, you know. Yeah. And it was an eye-opener for some, because you would think the natural allegiance would be to say, hey, you're right, it's predatory. And we need to shut this out of our community. Absolutely. Matter of fact, let's figure out how to get our banking system together. If other folks don't want to lend, you know, let's work with Liberty Bank or Liberty or whoever.
That's right.
And because moneyed people have long figured out that if they line pockets, and it's not as simple as somebody straight out sold out, like, you know, but it's that they've created a need, and if people are not careful when they over foundations or when they over organizations, then they kind of get, you know, they sacrifice them.
Not all money is good money.
Absolutely, I agree. I'd rather put some pennies together and make it, you know, but, you know.
One final subject, because I'm well over my hour with you. I promised you an hour, and we're well past that at this point. Charter schools. I mentioned it tangentially, but we really haven't talked about charter schools. Mm-hmm. Recently, the school board was asked to approve a set of charter schools. You only approved one. I believe 3 came to you. You only approved one. And even your school board president, David Tapman, who in the past has been in favor of charter schools, asked the question, how many more charter schools, I'm paraphrasing, how many more charter schools are we going to develop in East Baton Rouge? I think it's a good question. Do you have an idea of how many more charter schools we're going to allow in East Baton Rouge Parish? I know that charter schools are the baby of the Bessie Board, and the baby of EBR, and the baby of a couple of other entities out there. But how many more charter schools are we going to allow to exist in East Baton Rouge Parish school system?
As many as they can campaign and get folks in the seat that's going to vote for them. That's until there's no more money to tap out of the system. They'll pretend and say, we don't want y'all to be the next New Orleans, but if they can have it, they will take it. And why are charter schools a problem? Because at the end of the day, no matter how you slice it, it's pulling already under-resourced schools. It's pulling resources, okay? And so you cannot simultaneously say, I want more resources for my schools, and then turn around and give the same resources away to other people to do as good or 9 times out of 10 worse than what you were doing. when if you would have just had the resources to push into your schools in the first place, you could have lifted up your own boat. And some people have the sentiment of, well, you know, white folks make money like that. We need to make money. The problem is,
education should not be a money-making venture.
Period.
Education should be an educational venture.
And the fact that a price tag has been put on the backs of our babies while pretending that the price is to save and to fight the good fight for good education, and it's part of how we play this civil rights game now with education, and the irony, one interesting irony about the charter school deal is, okay, charter schools supposedly started they did. Actually, the concept was fashioned by a teachers union rep, a national teachers union rep, and it was a learning school, learning in the sense of educators, well, let's try something different. Okay, let's do a charter. And then, that works. We can scale it with your, okay. And then people who always see money and everything, it said, we can make money off of that. Mm-hmm. And it became a mechanism for privatization. And again, with that narrative of failing schools, the charter school concept grew into, this is how you're going to save your neighborhood school system, by chartering out because it's failing. So close the failing school, open the charter school. Well, when you look at the record, the quality does not improve.
No.
There may be a couple of examples that are not egregious, mm-hmm. and they're doing the right thing or what mm-hmm. have you. But the vast majority are no better than the schools that you had, and then you've lost. Somebody can call me and say, Miss Collins, you're on the school board. This is what's going on. Y'all, okay, let me check into it because I have that. I'm your voice. Mm-hmm. You don't have the same voice. People get mad with us if we change the time, which they should, of a board meeting. Do you know the time of the board meeting of the charter school? No, you don't. I mean, they have a board. They do meet. Mm-hmm. But are they as transparent with their process? No. And then at the end of the day, what's your recourse? I mean, your recourse is, you can take your child out and bring them back to us, which is great. Okay, and that's often what happens. But in terms of pushing for that school to be better, you can't vote out the board members of a charter school. And so then the problem is more than just your school choice, which is originated as a racist term, and it still is. Choice is still. It comes from very racist.
Of course, it does.
Okay, but for those who the quote unquote new propaganda don't get it, is racist. Okay, but so the bigger picture of it is, you are losing democratic control the more and more you sign away students to charter schools. And I think that in light of how we started with redistricting, I'm glad that you asked me that in closing.
Can I tell you, it's been a much better this hour than the last couple of hours that I've had.
Good.
This has been a very refreshing hour.
I know. If you're thinking like me, I get tired. I'm like, come on. I got to. And I appreciate when I first had a chance to sit down with you. I was like, oh Lord, he get it, he understand. And one of my favorite things that Prophetic Voices said in the letter that y'all did in response to the business community, saying that we trash and our own people can't lead us despite their proven record. My favorite thing that you all said was, stop calling us a failure.
Yeah.
Because we're not.
Yeah.
And when we allow people to tell us we're failures, then we allow them to give us anything because we ain't good enough. So let's take on what they tell us. And they have no intention of doing right by us, period. So thank you. You're in fresh air as well.
Vice President Dawn Collins.
Yes.
Thank you so very much for taking the time to be with us. Thank you for viewing. Thank you for listening. We'll be back again next time. This was good.